Hi everyone. Today I'm going to explain the new BlitzForge. BlitzForge is a tool for making sweeping changes across your code base using large language models. So there's nothing we can do here that we can't do without it, but we can do it with BlitzForge much faster. So it's split up into three main pieces. The first is what instructions do you want me to apply to each file independently? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, when I click OK, Brokk is going to kick off dozens or hundreds of parallel API calls to apply those instructions using its normal code agent, but with a file at a time and optionally some extra context. So, and then the third part is just what files do you want to apply this to? So the simplest is entire project, or I can select individual files, or I can list files manually. To make this more concrete, I'll give an example of how I used BlitzForge initially. In fact, this is what BlitzForge was created for, is that I wanted to upgrade Brokk to use error-prone and null-away static analysis tools. Traditionally, going from no static analysis to adding that is just a ton of work. And in fact, these tools give you instructions on here's how you can do this a little bit at a time so that you're not just overwhelmed by the amount of work of trying to do it everywhere at once. But we have LLMs, so we should be able to do it all at once. And that's what I built BlitzForge for. So let me click out of that. I'm going to do this in a work tree. So normally I'd just be able to create a new branch for my work tree from an existing branch. But in this case, I don't have an existing branch I want to use. So I'm going to have to go into the log tab where I have access to my tags. And I'm going to split off a new branch here because I actually added error-prone and null-away for the 0.10 release. And so to show what it was like without it, we're going to kick off that branch from the last 0.9.14 tag. So now when I go into my work tree, I'll just pick that, I'll just pick use existing. You know what, actually I need to go back here because when I created the branch from the tag, it helpfully checked it out, which means that I can't use that in another work tree until I move my main work tree back to the master branch. So I'm going to go back to the work trees now. And now I'll just say use existing branch. And there we go. Now I've got this new work tree window. So now if we go over to work trees, we'll see we are in the null-away respin branch. If we look at the log, we've got a bunch of stuff from May. So our work tree is where we want it to be. So now I'm going to take the null-away instructions. Those are there. It's fairly simple, but it doesn't have a couple things that are a little bit subtle, especially this ensures non-null if method. So I'm just going to copy that. There's a bunch of ways to get content into Brokk, but in this case, it's a fairly small piece of content, and I'll just paste it in. And so now when I open the BlitzForge, I'm going to check the box here to say I want to include the context from the workspace with every file that I'm processing. So my instructions are just going to be prepare this class for enabling null away by adding appropriate nullable annotations. And right now there's nothing selected. So just to show you what that looks like, I can go to entire project and say I want all the Java files. And Brokk is estimating that doing this with Flash 2.5 is going to cost me 25 cents. If I uncheck the workspace, then it drops by about a third. So you can see that including the workspace, including a given amount of context, even though it's fairly small, it's about 130 lines of code, or in this case, just lines, that does materially affect your cost. So let's see. The other options that can be useful here, and I'm not going to enable them for this demo, but you can see what happens as I start saying, include more related files. My cost estimate goes up. What that's doing is that's including a Brokk summary of Brock's going to inspect its code intelligence call graph to select what the most closely related files are to each file that I'm processing here, and generating a summary of that to include in the context that it gives the code agent for that file. So the Brokk summaries, remember, if I summarize context manager, or we can summarize context agent, sure. If I look at that, that's going to give me the declarations in each class, and each, this is an inner class, but it's not going to give me any of the implementation. So that's, it takes roughly about 10% as many tokens to represent that summary to an LLM as it does the raw file. So that's a good way to reduce your workspace surface area and its bloat when you're manually setting things up. And it's we're also going to use that in the BlitzForge. And then the next one here is a per file command. And if you hover over the info bubble, it's going to say, hey, you can do a substitution here of brace file path to run something on the command line using that file path substituted into your command and get some information out that's specific to that file. So where I've used this in the past is if I had a large Git branch, and I wanted to pull out just the changes that were made to that given file or to each file in that branch, rather than trying to pull that whole diff into my workspace, that's going to it's going to be huge and super expensive. Rather than do that whole diff, you just pull out the part related to that file. And so that does require a little bit of Git command line kung fu, but that's something that LLMs can show you how to write. So no problem. Speaking of workspace bloat, we do use prefix caching where it's available in the BlitzForge. So when we click OK, you're going to see that the first thing that it does is it says it's preloading the cache. So it's going to run one of those commands first so that the caching gets preloaded, and then it'll do everything else in parallel. And so, yeah, so you don't need to be too scared of including extra context with the files. You should respect that, and you should check out what that cost estimate turns out to be. But it's going to be less expensive than just doing it uncached, because we'll put that workspace context that's constant per file, we'll put that at the beginning so that it does get cached. So let's talk about the scope next. So I showed you entire project, and in this case, every project has a bunch of files that aren't source code. In this case, I only care about the Java source code. So that's going to cut it by almost 25%. I can use the normal Brokk completions here, and I can use globbing as well. So I could say, instead of just Brokk.java, I can say everything in the Brokk package, and that's going to give me a couple dozen files. Or I can come in and I can say, I want to paste a bunch of raw text and have Brokk parse out the relevant file names from that. And here's why that's useful is, for instance, suppose I only care about files that use the context manager class. So I can go to Brokk's symbol usage, and I can add in context. I'll say context m for manager, and we'll run that. So that's going to be a fairly large chunk of files. If we open this up, what it does is it gives me the class, what file name it's in, and then the source code of the method that uses that symbol. So we don't need all of that to just get a list of files, but if I copy that and go to, and I'll drop it, I'll drop it out of the workspace now. So if I copy that and come in and I paste that, then it's going to parse out what parts of that are actual file names, because remember, if we're looking at each header, it does give me that file name in the header there. And again, I'm going to say I just wanted the Java files. So that's going to give me 43 files. And I'm not going to do a per file command. I'll go ahead and keep it on Flash 2.5 so it goes faster. Flash really is fast. That's one of its best properties. And then we're not going to do any post-processing. If I did do post-processing, here's what that does. Architect is going to, by default, I'm going to give it the instructions of fix any build errors. And what I'll do is, if this checkbox is selected, I will build the project and then feed the errors into Architect, and with these instructions, just fix the build errors. And by default, I'm also going to include the output that Flash gave me while it was modifying those files. But I'm only going to do it by default for files that included changes. On the other hand, if I want to ask questions about my parallel processing, then I'm going to switch that to using ask. And I'm going to include all of the output. Again, this can be changed, but by default, I probably want all of the output. And then the last thing here is I can do a classification. This is done with a small, inexpensive language model. I'm going to give it a filter, only classes that care about context fragment, for instance. And that will classify those as relevant and whether I want to include that in the output that I give to the model for whatever question encapsulate this code better. And I have a typo there, but that's fine. We're going to disable this. And then, so my instructions are going to be, again, to null away by adding nullable annotations where appropriate. And actually, now that I think about this, we do want Architect to do this, but we're going to go with fix the build as our instructions, and I'm going to remove the filter here. So what that's going to do is it's going to run these instructions using this model, including the null away documentation that I added to the workspace, and we're just going to apply that to these files that I listed, just as a demonstration. And then afterwards, we're going to run Architect, and we're going to build the project first. Now, actually, in this case, I've left my Architect model on Claude 3.5 Sonnet, And after I click OK, I'll show you where to change that. But since we're just going to run this as a demo, and I'm going to click on stop before Architect really gets going, we'll just run it with this for now. So clicking on OK. So again, it's the first one's going to take a little bit longer because we are preloading the prefix cache. But then once that gets going, it should be pretty quick. All right, so there it finished, and it says we've invoked the architect. You can close this window, and now it's going to tell the architect here's what I parallel processed, and then it's going to go from there. But I'm going to click stop. Like I said, I don't want to actually wait for that to run. I was going to show you how to configure the models used there. So it just uses the default models for your for these buttons. So for the architect code, ask and search, the BlitzForge will use the default model for architect and ask. So the way I usually configure it is with Gemini 2.5 Pro High, and then ask is going to be 03. And then I'm gonna reset this while I'm in the dialog. All right, and that's BlitzForge. Happy building.